If you need multi-models, you start to have to build, again, this idea of this platform, and you have to deal with the challenges of how every model, despite them actually in some cases looking very similar and how they work, even some of the output is very similar, but they have different needs in terms of like their parameters and their prompts. So we experience a lot is that we have to customize prompts per model, and we have to then manage the version history and the control on that prompt. Like we've gotten to the point where if we add a period at the end of a prompt versus not, it'll change the answer. That's usually when you know like you're getting close to the model limits.
Welcome to part 2 of Unsolicited Feedback's episode with Ben Kuss, the CTO of Box. I'm your host, Fareed Mosavat. In part 2, we go deep on what it means to actually build AI products at scale, especially in the enterprise. Ben brings in a ton of examples from Box about how they allow for customers to use different models in different situations, how they think about adding AI capabilities across their product stack, and some of the technical challenges that presents. We talk a little bit about what it means to do AI operations. How do you test? How do you understand, iterate, evaluate, and actually implement AI strategies at scale? We then talk about what he sees as a revolution in unstructured data and how this creates significant new opportunities and capabilities for products like Box that deal with large swaths and terabytes, petabytes, many bytes of unstructured data in their products. Last, we spend some time talking about the complications of balancing both safety and security and the fast pace of innovation that you need to build on top of the rapidly changing capabilities of the AI tools. This was a really fun conversation for me. I learned a ton along the way from Ben. His sharp technical mind and also understanding of enterprise software was invaluable to me as I understood the opportunities coming in the future years here. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Let's dive right in. I want to start with a little rapid fire advice for product and technology people building an AI based on your experiences. So, number one, you said you've read 30 plus research papers in part 1 of the episode. How important is it to read the 30 papers? And I can share this in the show notes. There's a great list of 30 papers that Ilya from OpenAI shared with John Carmack when he wanted to get to know AI. How important do you think it is to get deep into the core tech, the core published research on this?
I'd say for an average person, like from the product and engineering perspective, you probably don't need to be able to take advantage of some of the capabilities. So I'll start with that part. Now, having said that, I do believe there's a lot of value in understanding how things work. You will be able to use databases better if you understand how databases work. If you know how operating systems work, then you can really start to understand them. So for people who are in charge of sort of the technology strategies, I think you really want to understand, like, why is a transformer, the T in GPT, what changed that made the world different? That's something you should know about so you can reflect on it. It helps you predict a little bit more of the future, as unpredictable as it is. And so for people like me who like want to know about technology, you should. To me, if you're talking about product and delivering value to customers, the real important thing is to be able to use it well. And to use it well is a different skill, in my opinion. Like for a little while, and still today, I guess, we're talking about prompt engineering. Like prompt engineering, which is how you get the AI to really do what you want, you don't have to know at all how it works. You just have to learn that with the way you talk to it, it'll come back to you in different ways. And interestingly, it kind of has some of this management-like capabilities. You learn how to talk to people or how to interact with organizations to get them to do things. If you think of AI like that, you can actually get some more benefits out of it. So I would say if you like the technology, you can spend your time with it, but that's not a requirement to be able to use AI very effectively.
It's almost like inspecting the black box versus knowing what's inside the black box, right? So I have to poke it and see how it responds and get really deep with that. I think that's really good advice. I found that personally. I was just tinkering with a project with it, and I got some really good results asking it for some one-off analysis. And then I asked it to write the code to do that the next time, and it failed miserably. And so then I had to start over, and I had to be like, okay, let's build this Python code one step by step. And all of a sudden I was like learning, how does it work? What is it good at? Okay, I got to break down the chain of thought. It's not going to get that right. You learn a lot about the capabilities by just tinkering with the box. I think that's good advice.
the thing you said, I think, is critically important. Not only do you try it, but you almost got to get to the point where you see it fail. You see it do something that you expected it to be off, because that's usually when you learn the most about the edges. And then you start to learn how it acts in that time. And it seems a little probabilistic, or weirdly, like if you ask it, are you sure about that? And then it's like, no, I'm not sure. Like those kind of things are when you start to explore the limits of these models. And I think that is one of the key pieces of advice to just constantly be doing. As long as they're coming out with new models and these like next generation capabilities, like you got to keep doing that if you're going to keep up with it.
Okay, so let's talk about models now. There's so many of them. Like I have a hard time keeping up. Open source models, closed source models, different implementations, etc. How do you think about understanding the wide range? They all do the same thing, but they're all different. How have you honed your skills around understanding these different models and their capabilities?
Yeah, nobody's doing the world any favors with all the different pieces, right? Like it's every time you're like, okay, what's this GPT thing? Oh, it's GPT-3. Oh, 3.5, 3.5 turbo, 4, 4.0. It gets crazy. Like at some point you have this, it's hosted on Azure or AWS, maybe it's Anthropic, it's Claude 3 with Opus versus, so it's weird that you almost start to need, like, the joke is like you need a PhD in just the model names and how they work. But I think that at some point you start to just recognize the big players and the big buckets. And so the way that we talk about it internally and with our customers is right now you see that there's like a set of premium models and a set of standard models. And you can start to like kind of bucket things that way. And I think over time, these definitions will shift and you might see us get to super premium and GPT 4.5 or when like the new Gemini models that are really great. But like by bucketing them, you start to see like they all start to resemble a price point, performance, capabilities. If you see, have you ever seen the like ELO scores where like you can actually grade models against each other? They clump in different areas. And so these levels are one way to look at it. Now, at some point, you should also like see their big attributes, like where are they hosted? What kind of trusted platform are they? Like, what are the models protected and safe? Or are they like open source models too? There's some great open source models. So you just have these big buckets, and then the details of Mistral and Llama and Gemini and Palm. And this might be one of those things like similar to a moment ago where you talk about them as it's good to know, but you might not need to because you like at some point there's like just too much info. And so for what we do is because there's so much complexity and so much choice and so much like uncertainty about the models, we provide our customers with the chance to either pick their model or bring their own model, which brings us no end of like challenges to because we have to know all about it. And we have to be the one who's this model with this prompt is good at this. And if you want to change it, we'll let you. And then we have to then be ready for them to change it and give them the same kind of enterprise class security and quality and so on. But I think many product people, I guess if I were to give them advice, maybe like we're Box, we're a decently sized company. We have a lot of customers and like a decent amount of resources. Maybe don't go for the full multi-model approach yet, like we did. We have to, because that's our promise to our customers, but start with one. And then later on, it might be a premature optimization to support too many of them for an average startup or our product out there.
Yeah. So let's say I am a startup and I'm excited about GPT 4.0 versus GPT 3.5 turbos, let's say, or 3 or 4. How do you think about these things are unpredictable in some respects? Again, it's not like a CPU where you're like, I replaced my 386 with a 486 and it's 10% faster and it does exactly the same thing with the same instruction set. It's a lot more complex than that. It's even probably more complex than switching clouds, right? It's more complex than switching service providers for CDNs. There are so many other things you can swap that basically work one-to-one. But because they're non-deterministic, like models have hard to predict behaviors. How do you think about change management around these things, especially when you may have built 20 different features around using these AI capabilities in your platform? What should people start thinking about putting into place to be able to do this effectively?
I think one of the key things, and we both build this in and also tell our customers this, is you should never expect it to always be perfect, even if it gives you good results. And you should handle that within your processes, your product, and everything else. And so to the point, like even if you set the temperature to 0, which we commonly do for enterprise class use cases, there is randomness to it. And I don't know if people know, but so that when you have an AI model, most of the different models have an ability for you to tell how creative it is. And so basically it's,
okay.
Or technically speaking, when it predicts the next word, how random should it be about what the word is? And you'll see if you turn the temperature up to like, it's like 0, 1 usually, like to 1, then you basically, if you ask the same question twice, it gives you really different info. And that's great if you wanted to tell you a joke or write a poem. It's a silly thing. If you turn the temperature to
Write
zero,
a novel, whatever, yeah.
It just tells you the same joke over, and then that's not what you want. But even if you set the temperature to zero, there still is a probabilistic aspect of the models. And so you have to kind of take that into account. So sometimes it will. And I, again, using an anthropomorphization of AI to understand it, sometimes people are unpredictable too. And so oftentimes you build processes with people in mind, double checks, gates, like those kinds of things. And I think that using AI in that way, like sometimes in conjunction with a human, like one maybe to generate and one to check or vice versa, like that is usually where we see it be the best approach. Even though some of the future where, the AI did everything for me and made all these great decisions and then we didn't have to do anything and then got all this productivity benefits for me or for my company or for anything else, I think we're going to be a ways until we get people to do that and that AI can be reliable enough to do that. And just to give you one more analogy, is if somebody came out of school with 7 PhDs and they're really smart and they go in your organization and you're like, great, I have such a, like there's a lot of them and you can use them all the time. Like then you get a lot done, but you don't just say, now make all my decisions for my company. Like you have to build in at some point, they may be misguided or wrong or get confused and so on. So I think, again, that's the model to think about.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I not worry about, but wonder about in this is, especially as we see more workflows, automations, things being done. So let's just use the example. There's a ton of companies building outbound sales automation and communication automation around AI. And you update a model and you think it's better and you test it in a few like casual ways. Yeah. You have no idea what the cascading uncertainty is of that product release, which is, again, like there are so many things that are so different about building in the AI space than building before. We are used to deterministic inputs driving deterministic outputs. And now we have like deterministic inputs driving indeterministic outputs that then go into another thing that makes more indeterminate outputs, et cetera. And how should I think about something as simple as which model is better for my business? Yeah. Seems like it's a lot of power to put in the hands of a customer. I think it's even harder it would be hard as a product company to do that with a huge test suite. I don't know. How much do you think about testing, seeing outputs, understanding, evaluating it qualitatively, quantitatively, et cetera? It seems like a hard problem.
It's an incredibly hard problem, especially like for us, again, enterprise focus, right? Or we have a significant portion of the Fortune 100. We have 100,000 enterprise customers. They all do not like things to change underneath them. They do not, in some cases, want you to have and the funny thing is the providers have weirdly the same problem. It's just very rare for you to go to GCP or Azure and they're like, we released this thing and then later on, by the way, it's going away. Like we ran out of GPUs. We don't offer that model anymore. And it's usually like, hold on, I need to do what now? Like you're taking something away. And that's just a rare thing to happen for infrastructure or for enterprise providers. And because the change management is definitely a big concern. I think in a weird way, the world is getting away with it right now because there's so many new benefits of the next version. Like maybe you don't need the old GPT-4 because GPT-4o is more capable and faster and cheaper. So of course you want those things. And so then you don't have to deal with the change management of this. Now, I do believe we're going to see this more and more for what it's worth. So it's going to be more of a problem. But yes, absolutely. This idea of what is going to change underneath you is an ongoing challenge for, I think, for everyone, but also for even the end people who are experiencing it.
Yeah, like I think about things like as a growth-oriented person, a lot of the processes we developed around building things was like, okay, let's put it behind a feature flag. Let's A/B test it. Let's measure some outputs. Let's measure some results. Let's see what happens on the other side. And by introducing uncertainty, where it depends what the customer does for what you get back, is an A/B test that just measures metrics on the other side the right way to evaluate success of a feature? How much does it depend? If I look at 1,000 customers, they generally do the same thing in a sign-up flow. They sign up and they finish it. But if I do 1,000 people into, let's say, a chatbot, they're going to do 1,000 different things. So my data may not be relevant versus the control group because it's not a real control group. It's not a well-controlled experiment because they asked 1,000 different things of that chatbot. And so I'm just struggling with like how to think about performance, evaluation, product quality in a world with so much indeterminate outcomes and so open-ended inputs.
Yeah. And to add another layer of complication, as we were talking about this enterprise versus consumer world. So one of our challenges is we are never allowed to see any of this data. Like it's not our data, it's our customers' data. So we have no clue if what they're asking nor what the response is. And then we contractually like talk about that. It's like, this is, and even if you're a consumer company.
Or whether the input data is any good. Like it's so complicated. Yeah.
And so for all, like you have to worry that like somebody typed in something they didn't expect and it gave them like a really horrible answer. And even in consumer companies have this challenge because this is typically like you're written in the terms and it tells you like what you're allowed to do or not. And most people don't like you using and looking at all their stuff, or at least like you have to control that. And so for us, this is strict. So there's an interesting technique, which I've seen multiple people use, and we've been using it for a while, which is you get an AI to tell you if another AI did a good job. And this is where a world of like different models can work. So like people ask us, they're like, how good is your quality? We have to tell them, like, first of all, we don't really know. We're not allowed to look, right? We're an enterprise company. But at the same time, according to like, we have AI we run and then we periodically check it with another AI. Is this, if somebody asks this question and this was the answer and they're like, was that a good answer? And then AI can look at it in protected settings, isolated. And so that it can say, yeah, that's pretty good or no. And then that helps us with the sort of the quality score. So we know that like, we think if we're going to release this new thing, we test it on our sort of test sets that we have to stabilize it. But then in the wild, again, we don't know what people are asking. And then we can know if these quality scores go on. So some people call this the emerging world of AI ops or AI observability. And then these kind of techniques are something you need if you deal with this challenge of making sure that it's going to kind of randomly introduce things in the middle of it all.
Okay. So it sounds like the process is something like, and I didn't even think of this, black box inputs with black box outputs and black box maybe data that's like part of the context there.
Yeah, evaluation.
So
we call it a grader or a checker. Yeah.
And then there's another AI that maintains that sort of, I don't know what the inputs and outputs are, but evaluates that output and reports that back. And that creates a feedback loop where you can consistently improve basically and evaluate different models versus each other.
Yeah, I think it's still emerging, but there's this world that evolved called ML ops, where engineering teams needed to like do something different when they were doing traditional ML, because knowing whether or not it like responded was not quite the thing you need. You need to know if it responded with a good answer, and then you had a bunch of techniques. But many of those are just different with AI. So you have to start to get this, some people call it like an AI ops, where you get these other set of techniques that layer on top of ML ops to be able to do these things. And I think it's a really interesting world. There's a lot of good companies building a lot of good stuff on different techniques that different companies are using. But this is an area I expect to keep growing.
Yeah, fascinating. Do you think your customers are good at evaluating as well? Like how important is qualitative feedback and measurements? Thumbs up, thumbs down, ratings, this worked, this didn't work, support. Is that a piece of the puzzle too here?
Yes, I think so. For many products and tools, you get this capability, which is to like have the user give you feedback. Now, of course, in the enterprise setting, you have to be very cautious because the natural thing is if it's a thumbs down, then somebody should go look at it and be able to figure out and change the model or whatever. We strictly don't do that, right? Like it's our obligation. For all we know, that was some very critical thing that they asked. And so we can't look at any of it. And so we are hamstrung in an enterprise class setting with this idea that we can't ever see our customers' data. And so whatever feedback you can get, it is useful. I'd say right now, though, like the bigger challenge is that many enterprises, they're in different phases of this adoption curve of AI. So many of them aren't quite sure the use cases that they put it in. And even if they're aware of it, they haven't quite like fully adopted it like yet because of other concerns, like, again, around security, compliance, privacy, and so on. And so like one of the things you'll see a lot of companies talk about, and it is the capabilities, because the capabilities of what you can do then makes people be like, I can use it in this way. And in a lot of times, some of the big value is not something that even sounds that awesome. So if you're an international customer, you're working, like you're at a company and you're familiar with the language, but not so much, but you start to read something in another language. We added some accessibility for you to use AI on your documents you're looking at. And we thought it'd be useful to asking questions and parsing complex docs and so on. And some customers tell us, like, I use it every day. We're like, oh, you must have some really complicated material because you want the AI. And they're like, no, I just want the AI to tell me in my language and so that so I can make sure I really understood it. And it just didn't occur to us that was a great use case. So then we see that it's more popular in different parts of the world. It leads us to want models that are really good at multiple languages and so on. But this idea of the capabilities being the thing that we talk about a lot, I think we're going to still see that going forward. So in enterprise like software, one of the things we always do when we talk to customers is we first ask them, what are your kind of challenges that you have so that we can give you solutions? Like it's like a common technique of sales and everything else is we don't want to just tell you about things. We want to solve problems. And then if I've had customers tell me, I remember one CIO very, very violently, I don't know what my problems are. I don't even know it's possible. You tell me with your AI what you can do, and then I'll tell you whether I have a problem that you can solve, which is weirdly the complete opposite of how you normally do software development and in product or sales or anything. And I do believe we're going to be in this phase for a little while, is like people must, at a product level, at a customer level, at a user level, be imagining at all times how to use these new capabilities. And I think it's going to be a fun time that we're in, and we'll look back on it like, oh, that was an interesting time.
I think this is such an important point. We already talked about it once, but I feel like it's worth like hitting again here, which is this is a true technology shift. I think the best example I can come up with in my lifetime, which is not in my professional lifetime, is the emergence of the PC, which is, it's not, oh, I have a customer problem and let me create a solution using the technology to the thing you can already state. It's literally, we have this magic box. It does some really cool stuff. We know a few things that it can do really well. That's what ChatGPT is there for, to demonstrate, etc. But like a PC, you don't even know enough to ask it what you want to do. I don't think anyone came and said, what I really need is I need to build tabular forms of my financial data so I can do better modeling and prediction of the future. Someone had to like invent VisiCalc and be like, look at this amazing thing you couldn't do before that now you can do. And we haven't been in an era like that for a long time. Again, even the things you described, mobile had some of this. Uber is a good example. You had to invent Uber before you knew you needed Uber.
Yep.
But cloud is like, you used to own computers here and now they're over here. And it unlocks capabilities and it accelerates, but it doesn't have this quite the same tell me what I can do with it thing. But what's even, again, to compare to the PC era, what's so cool is I remember in the PC era, there were a lot of people who were just like, I want one. I don't know what I can do with it. I just want one because I think it's cool. And I hear there's a game I want to play. Like I want to play Prince of Persia or Karateka or whatever. And now it's the same with AI. You have all this excitement, this hype sort of cycle is a good thing because it drives early adopter engagement, but coupled with this, but I need you to tell me what to do with it. And so it's a very unique product development timeframe. And actually, like now it's making me like excited in some ways to be like, oh, you can just like invent stuff out of thin air in a way that like has been harder to do, I think, at least in my professional experience so far.
Yeah, I think it is an interesting time when we're talking about like shifts that are more important than cloud or mobile, because these are like, and the mention of the personal computer is a good one. The internet might be a good one too. I lived in a time when there was no internet, and I think that was a pretty big shift.
I think we're about the same age, so we probably lived through the same phases. Yeah, it was like, I remember someone showed me Google. Yeah. Right. And someone showed me Google and I was like, what do I do with it? And they're like, try this. And I'm like, holy crap.
I think it is this like whole new way to do things. And again, I think it throws off conventional wisdom in a lot of ways, because you just like almost by definition of these like rare platform shifts is they're rare. Like they don't happen a lot. So therefore people don't have techniques. So you have to almost go look back. And then like, how do you handle all of these complications looking forward? I do think it puts a lot of pressure on people who are like risk averse and change averse, because then like it becomes like things move so fast and are changing so much. And I do believe that the AI stuff is happening faster than some of any of the things we mentioned. The techniques that you see and how they jump up and how quickly the world is looking at these, I think it is not, I don't have a precedent that would be, took a long time for people to get PCs in their house. It took a while for people to continue to operate the internet. But ChatGPT was one of the most, if not the most adopted in a short time frame tools out there. And in many ways, it's just that we're writing the new rules that we may never actually ever experience again.
Yeah, PC adoption, honestly, you could say PC deployment didn't really finish until the iPhone was 3 years out. Like that really was like the end of the tail, and the numbers around AI tool adoption are just through the roof. Yeah, 100 million users in first 3 months. I don't think we've seen. Even Facebook, I don't think grew that fast. So the excitement around it and usage and adoption it's not just that the technology is shifting, it's the willingness to try it is accelerating really quickly as well.
I always tell this to our teams is like, when they're thinking about a cool feature, because people just think in AI terms in many ways. And then one of the questions is, would that be a good feature if you didn't say the word AI? And that's a weird, interesting way for you to also be thinking about, don't do AI just because it's AI. Do AI if it solves a problem or you believe it's a better way to do something that you believe is valuable. And remember, at some point in time, either because maybe people get AI fatigue, or maybe some of the promises weren't fulfilled and we hit a little lull, or because it just becomes commonplace, people will not care that it's AI, and you want your product and your feature and things you do to last for a while. And so for me, this is like the thing to always keep in mind as we're talking about like the craziness of the moment, to always be like, but don't forget, you have to deliver value or productivity, new capabilities, like something that matters to your users, to your enterprises, if you're an enterprise customer, whatever, to both. And if you don't do that, it's probably going to be a fun time that will be followed up by disappointment. And so you want it to be like in a typical hype curve. It goes up and then it goes down, but then it levels off. And you want it to focus on where it's going to level off as opposed to how high the curve will get at that moment.
Yeah. I want to pivot here a little bit because I know this is something you mentioned earlier, which is you said something around like Box is in the business of unstructured data, which was just a small thing, but I latched onto it because it's something I've been thinking about a lot, which is like databases are all about structured data, right? Like I have a field that says name and I have whether I bought or not. And I can run queries like what percentage of signups bought within 30, 60, 90 days and learn a bunch of stuff. And we got to data warehouses where we're sucking all this data in from different places. And it changed the way we do business, right? Growth became a thing that people talked about. Marketing became more technical. Sales became more analytical. Like all these sort of things emerged about how we work.
Yep. And the terminology.
It seems like LLMs are like a way to do that with weird data, like data that doesn't have structure, et cetera. And since you said you're the unstructured data company, I'd love your thoughts on this and where you think it's going. Because right now we think of LLMs as an interface to ask questions. But I think there's more to it in terms of making sense of confusing globs of data.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think you said it well, which is we have experienced a structured data revolution in the last 5, 10, 15 years. From a technology perspective, from the tools, from the things we use, and then how we use them. And that has been amazing. Like you hear this term like big data and like analytics and all these, like we have these great technologies, Snowflake and BigQuery and just all of these wonderful ways by which you experience structured data. But like
ETL, reverse ETL, ELT, like all the different things that have come from it, right? Yeah.
And there's this huge terminology around it. And for us at Box, our job is hundreds of billions, trillions of these very valuable pieces of data, but unstructured. It comes in, some of them are videos, some of them are images, some of them are PowerPoint, some of them are doc files. And then historically, no technology existed that understood it other than a person. If you wanted to understand this data, you had to have somebody search for it, read through it, understand it in different ways. And if you don't do that, then you don't get the value. And so there's this like treasure trove of data in every single organization for every single person that they're not taking advantage of because it's too hard to draw the insights from it. So at Box, we've been doing AI for a long time, but it used to be AI was only in the form of trying to like look at a small slice of content and try to structure something. I have a model that's good at this one little piece of content. And then people are like, yeah, but what about my PowerPoints, or I wrote a bunch of notes, or I had a Word doc that explained all this. And then, so again, go find it and read it. And so with AI now, it has the ability to do these things. Again, it acts like a human, like the generative aspect of AI is not just it's generative, but it also understands what humans generate, right? And so it can come back and automate many of these things. And for us, this is why we are so excited. It's why we are so in the middle of all the AI and trying to use them all and bring them to our customers, because it gives you things that weren't possible before. And the same technology, like that does the translation example that I mentioned, also answers questions, also can look through a contract and look for some risky clauses, that also can help you figure out like how to take like a long, complicated document and summarize it for you so you understand it, look up key info. Like all these things become like these insights, this analysis, this thing that you would almost happily have paid somebody to do for you is now available at your fingertips. And not just in one little thing you're looking at, but across a wide swathe of information. We see it as the thing you said, which is that we are in the midst of experiencing a revolution of unstructured content that the AI will not only help you understand, but it can also help you structure so that you can then take advantage of the other data tools that you already have. And this is what we do. We wake up every morning and we just think about these things.
Yeah. Questions on this. I'll just use an example. Here's 2 things that were really hard that you end up not doing because they're hard. One is I throw out a survey, an NPS survey, and I get 4,000 responses. And I want to know what all the things that made people detractors are. And someone would have to go through, a human, as you described, and read each one and code it. And it's okay. That seems like I can create structure out of unstructured data. Another one that's really, I always thought about is what percentage of Slack conversations are about work or about non-work? Turns out to be like basically impossible to answer that question. There's security questions, there's privacy questions. How do we do it without violating like certain covenants that we have with companies? But even beyond that, even if you were allowed to just dump the database of all messages, which you're not, no one can read all of that. I can't read all your cat messages and like figure out they're about cats, that kind of thing. So I can see how I can ask one-off questions of this. Oh, what are all the detractors in my NPS survey? My question for you is, do you think that there will be structured intermediary representations that emerge? Or do you think like we're going to interact with the unstructured data directly? Is it like I ask the AI to structure this for me? Or is it like I treat it like a data lake that has everything in the world in it, and it's about prompting and about interaction that gets me there? Does that make sense as a question?
It does. I completely understand. And I would say it's both. It's absolutely both. And then I'll even give you the framework for it, which is if you know ahead of time the kinds of things you care about, then you go for help the AI structure it for you, because you have tools and processes and capabilities to really do a lot, even with traditional ML, on your structured data. And so if let's say that you wanted to know some of those things you mentioned, like the historical way was, for like your example of the survey results, was you had some old school ML, like old school 3 years ago, like where it would be like, this is positive or this is negative, and you start to trust in that. And then you add that up. But like now you get so much more. But at some point, if you know ahead of time, you can ask AI to just go through it all, give you some examples, give you the structure, and then use it. So like a traditional capability of this would be like for us, like there's a lot of contracts in Box. Like this is a classic form of content, like really pretty important content. They take many different forms. And then at some point, people just always, who are the parties? What is the day? What's like, who signed it? And all these different pieces. So if you have that structured up front, then you can start to do queries on it. You can use AI powered queries, but like queries the way you think about it. Now, then at some point, if you have enough just kind of unstructured data in general, and you don't know what you want ahead of time, you need to have the ability to just ask this. And so we offer this feature we call like multi-doc QA, which is this idea of you have a bunch of stuff and you're like, what? Let's say it's financial documents or something. Like, what was the revenue of Q3 last year? And then I don't know where it is. I don't know anything. And then it has to go look through it. And so if you had known ahead of time, you could have structured it. But the process of getting the AI to read everything to structure it is like a different technique. And so I think you need both. And I think you'll see people like Box, we offer both. And there's just different interesting techniques. And I say both, but not like also not an exclusive or, but like some cases you can get the data working really well together. So for instance, if you said, I want you to find me this set of information, which is like a query against your structured metadata, the AI structured, and then look through in great detail all of these contracts that came out of it to then help me like compare them in different ways. Like that kind of thing is the next generation of using all of the AI techniques to then get some real business value associated with it.
Yeah, what I think is so cool about thinking about it this way is there are things that humans are awesome at, but slow because it requires time to look at every contract. But if you hand me a contract from literally any company in the world, there's things that are hard, but here's what I can tell you. Who signed it? What's their address? How much money is it for instance? I can inspect that and figure it out. The fact is, though, if there's 10,000 of them, I can't do it at speed. Traditionally, computers were really bad at that, right? Maybe you'd OCR it. Maybe you use DocuSign or another signing tool. So you would have had to structure it up front. And so now what we have is we have this sort of like blend where there are now jobs that humans are obviously good at, that computers are also good at, and they can do it fast at the speed of computing. And yeah, like what I'm curious about is it that I'll have a traditional Snowflake database too? And then I'm asking the AI to look at both, or generating metadata on the fly, et cetera. I just keep thinking about this because there's so much data, so much. And now hopefully we'll be able to unlock that power for product discovery, for data analytics. I would love to know if a feature I built made people nicer or not, or made them interact with longer messages, whatever. There's types of things like that are just hard to do.
Totally. And so we call it, so the terminology is metadata. So typically for us, we have this unstructured data and then there's data about the data, metadata, and it comes in a structured or semi-structured form. And it is absolutely for us extremely exciting, the thing you said, which is that these models can arbitrarily cross multiple data sets, structure your data for you. You just have to ask. And you have to make sure you have examples and things, but it's not a trained model. It used to be that if you wanted to get structured data out, you had to find a very specific models. I saw this company that handled not just contracts, but leases, but not just leases in the UK. And that was like one thing you had to go do. But now like GPT-4 is like better than all of this stuff. And different models have their specializations on, like, just in general, though, they do an awful lot more. And this thing you're talking about is there's going to be this revolution of getting not only AI to answer questions directly, like you said, but then just structuring it all this info, and you just have a lot more for your data lake. You have a lot more insights to then run traditional ML on. And that is a huge value. And that is something that, this almost sounds funny, but it's exciting to think about unstructured data becoming structured data for metadata. Like, this is a really interesting moment for people who, like me, who live in this.
Yeah, and to not have to create that metadata a priori is also super powerful, right? If I had a question about some analytics thing, any of the companies I've worked at, we had unstructured JSON blobs of event data, but we had to, if you wanted to ask questions of it, you had to know which columns you cared about. Yeah. And if I had a question about, oops, it's this other column contains this data, even in a simple event query, and I wanted to understand that, then it was a whole process. We had to write special code to go collect that. It wasn't in the data warehouse. It's not fast. It takes forever. So you just wanted to, the idea now that not only can you create metadata really simply, but it's actually relatively trivial to generate it on the fly. It just unlocks a lot of power, and I don't even know where it's headed. It's just, as a product builder and a super analytical person, ignoring like your types of just like as a person building and wanting to ask questions of my user base, it's exciting to think about all of the new types of things I can ask and get structured responses to. And that's what I get super excited about.
Yeah. It's interesting to wonder if we're in the midst of an unstructured data revolution, and we'll talk about that like in the future. Like, we'll look back and be like, oh yeah, I remember the days when, like, this wasn't all possible. And we just, almost like we do with data today, we find ourselves using it for very valuable purposes. I believe that, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I do too. And I think it will unlock a lot of product insight, but also product value. Again, like the way the spreadsheet, we don't know exactly what the VisiCalc is in this space, right? But there's something like that, I think, out there for this kind of information that will unlock a ton of value. And I suspect Box is building it along with some other people as well. Okay, this is like random, but we talked a little bit about AI ops, evaluating. So when structured data happened, we got like all these new layers of important stuff to build, right? Data orchestration, data observability, anomaly detection, continuous integration, like ML ops, etc. Are there pieces of that puzzle that you as a technologist building in this space see coming together on this side? Because I think most people think, I take my OpenAI API and I dump stuff on it, and then I get answers. But I suspect there's a whole scaffolding around it that could be interesting for people to hear about as they think about where there's missing pieces or how they should be thinking about building.
Yeah, definitely. It's almost like I talked about earlier, which is that there's this sense of, it's actually pretty easy to get started, but that doesn't mean it's production ready and has the quality and the controls and the observability that you need to offer a, like, what you would typically call high quality production class service. And then also, the moment you make your world more complex, like with now we have different image, audio, video types. And then additionally, if you need multi-models, you start to have to build, again, this idea of this platform. And you have to deal with the challenges of how every model, despite them actually in some cases looking very similar and how they work, even some of the output is very similar, but they have different needs in terms of like their parameters and their prompts. So we experienced a lot is that we have to customize prompts per model, and we have to then manage the version history and the control on that prompt. Like we've gotten to the point where if we add a period at the end of a prompt versus not, it'll change the answer. That's usually when you know, like, you're getting close to the model limits. And any change is something that you need to worry about. And so you then have to have the process and the techniques on top of that. For us, what we've done is we've used like a series of like inspired by ML ops techniques, like some of the ones mentioned, but then also we just have the change control that like needs to be really precise about whenever you want to make a change, don't just make it. Even if you think it fixes a problem, you first have to make sure that it like we spent a lot of time creating a test set that we had ourselves, so that with example questions, example extracting of data, so that we know that if we change something, that we won't break something that people would expect to work. And then also the change control aspect for customers. Like we offer APIs to our customers. And so we then give them the ability to do these changes too, so that they can then control it themselves and then freeze in time, like the prompt they want to use and the model they want to use and so on. And so I think, yeah, it's definitely a world where it's quite complex to do it in a way that would be meeting these kind of enterprise grade requirements, even for consumers you want to hit.
Yeah. So just extracting from that a little bit, it sounds like change control, change management around prompts and model inputs feels like an important area to be thinking about. Another is deployment. So like, how do you deploy? How do you test? How do you manage rollouts, et cetera, which is very similar to data or even engineering type stuff. And then also like customer control and data control, I think you mentioned as a piece of the puzzle there. And then test and evaluation. So what are the pieces you have that of the value chain around, is it working, and the stuff we talked about before? And it's interesting to start to see these emerging pieces. My next question for you is, if you were talking to a startup, let's say, Box, different story, you guys have a lot of internal stuff around it, and I were choosing a provider to build against, would you suggest a focus more on this control layer aspect, which, like, for instance, tons of great stuff being built by OpenAI around enterprise and API management and developer tools, or model fit? Because like you could go open source, for instance, but you probably don't get all of this data security, privacy, et cetera, stuff that OpenAI has, or vice versa. Like, how would you think about that decision?
So there's a couple pieces of it. So first of all, like I'm typically in the camp that if you start to talk about training models, you like probably be careful, because I'm very saddened when I see like good startups that kind of ran out of money because they spent too much time and money on infrastructure to train models just to have a new model come out that is way better than anything that they specialized in. So for me, like my typical, if I'm talking to startups, is like, you should really know you want to train a model before you train a model. It's like an optimization in right now. So that's one angle to it. The other one is that what's emerging, I think, is it was really nice, is that the big public cloud providers, you know, people like GCP, AWS, Azure, and others, including like IBM and others, they start to have these like model gardens. And the really nice thing is that you can build it so that you're using one of these in with the hook it up, the infrastructure, and then changing models can be just a configuration parameter. And that makes life a lot easier, because then you don't have to get to the point where you're switching infrastructure providers just to switch the models. And so I would look into that. Even if you want to use an open source one, I would typically recommend, just for all the benefits of these kind of cloud technology providers, is use it hosted by one of these providers, because they'll give you that simplicity. And then also, again, as an optimization, like typically I don't think most people should be worrying about GPUs other than the big providers. There's typically, if you're training or if you're running on infrastructure, but usually the inference is, I think, quite cheap in terms of compared to what you could do it yourself in many examples. And certainly you have to get to a certain scale before you can properly like run it. So I would almost always say start with what's out there and then optimize as you need to. In some cases, that might be an open source provider. In some cases, that might be you run some stuff yourself. In many cases, even at scale, I don't know if you need to do that. And so even though that's a big question, it's fundamental. Answer that question after you found what the thing is that's very valuable, get your product market fit, figure out your costs and so on. Because I think along the way, you'll find that you've learned a lot and you would have regretted too early focusing on that kind of infrastructure model approach.
Yeah, interesting. And I think it's been interesting to see how much product providers, OpenAI in particular is the one I'm most familiar with, is building like around the model, not so much the model itself and just deploying it like what you could do, but rather secure pipes for data and developer controls and enterprise type features, et cetera, in an attempt at some locked in. And it's interesting because you choose the model, but then you're also choosing your interface with it. And you have to be careful about getting locked in, but also it's good for them on some level as well. I mentioned earlier that I got real excited about agents. Like, I don't even, time isn't a thing anymore. I can't remember. It was 3 months ago, 6 months ago, et cetera. But starting to see some of these, and now you're seeing all these like agent platforms come out. And my experience with it early was honestly that world's dumbest intern that gets stuck in a corner and spins around in a circle. And like, it's, you know, can't do a lot of different things. Was poor at planning, et cetera. And I've had better luck personally with the prompt interfaces at doing agent-like things. But I'm curious your thoughts about it as what's the next step here? Like, how good will autonomous agent type behavior get? And what do you think's blocking us from getting there?
Yeah, I think first things first is it's a really interesting question. What is an agent? And I think even though there's kind of an industry definition, it somewhat varies. Like people will what's a co-pilot? What's an assistant? What's a model? And so for me, the definition is a little fuzzy, but usually when people are talking about agents, they're usually referring to something that's goal driven, where the AI has a bit of a chance to make a plan on what it's going to do. And it's typically iterative. And so there's a world where a lot of things we're doing, you could consider them to be just really simple agents, but usually the agents have this idea of working. And I do believe that this is a really important insight because if you think about how people work, very few people sit down and write an essay in one shot and turn it in. Very few people compose an email straight, never read it, and then just say go. But that's what we're asking these AI agents to do, right? They're just for us, here's a 500-page complex set of research. Summarize it for me, extract these insights, and then done. And then the thing has the equivalent of 10 PhDs, but it still has a attention buffer as represented in these AI algorithms. And so if you can get a lot more value out of them, if you let them think about it a little bit conceptually. So the idea of it's able to iterate. So the simplest thing is, have you ever asked a question to one of these AI models like ChatGPT, and then it gave you something and you asked it, are you sure? A lot of the time it'll be like, no, I'm not so sure. And you're like, why did you tell me that? Yeah. And then you realize that's a human-like behavior.
I've heard this is a good trick. Never take the first thing it says and just say, try again. Yeah. And then you get a good version of it by the third time, which I think
there's another one, which is we talked about a bit. What if when you ask a question, you have an AI answer, and then you have another AI look at it and be like, I'm not sure if it's right. What about this? And another AI will go, well, okay, yeah, here's another, and run that 4 times. And then usually at the end of it, you end up with a better answer. And again, I will highlight that this is how people work. Usually almost every discussion you have, you're going to come out of it better just by exploring it. It's there is a value of a naysayer, somebody challenging you to get you better quality. But we are not exposing our AI this way. We're just expecting it to be perfect. And I do believe that you'll see that if you apply some of these techniques, you end up having something like the equivalent of GPT 3.5 can start to give you GPT-4-like answers. And then GPT-4, if you apply these techniques, you can give even better, maybe the equivalent of the next generation models. And I think that there's this natural sort of way you think about it, which is iteration typically leads you to have better results. And so this is the beginning of the sort of the insight on why this works well. So the next thing you'll have the agent do is not just try 4 times, but actually make a little plan. If you have a simple question and answer, then maybe you answer it, double check your work, and you're done. But if you have something complex that needs you to go gather data first, maybe to your point you said earlier, go gather data, structure some information, then turn around and summarize it, and then give me the summary of that piece. That is a very agentic set of capabilities. It had a goal, it had a plan, it had instructions that it followed, it had tools available to it. And I believe that this will be a big part of when we start to see more value going forward. And it will use the similar models that we have today. It'll just get more out of them. And now highlight to your question, at some point, it didn't work immediately, like AutoGPT, those kind of things. It was cool, but it wasn't giving you these great things. So you need a set of tools and a process to help you with this approach. Because if you're not careful, the little iterations it does amplifies the randomness. And then oftentimes that doesn't lead you to the kind of results that you want.
Yeah. Analogy I've used for this is just how do you write a product spec? You sit down and you think about it and you maybe draft it out and write an outline and you send it to your engineering lead. And you're like, can you give me quick thoughts on this? And they put comments in the doc. And then you go iterate based on the comments and resolve those comments and then send it again. And I'd love to see more interactions that feel like this with the tools that we're using, because that's my use of GPT now is a lot more hey, I want to give you some chain of thought, right? Here's the way to break down the problem. I don't trust you to do it on your own. Do this one step at a time, and then I'm going to give you feedback, and then you go back. And I think chat starts to be a pretty frustrating interface for that.
Yeah.
I'd rather we're pair programming on a Python script, right? Yeah. That kind of thing. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how the UX emerges. So it's not just the idea of these independent, iterative, goal-based agents, but what's the right user experience for working with one? Is it multimodal? That's what GPT seems to think, right? OpenAI does, or something else. I don't know.
And to your point, we are coming to expect that the AI should respond to you with a perfect answer in a few seconds. And that will probably need to change if you have agents that are doing a lot of work. In the same way, if you assign somebody in your company a task, you don't expect them to turn around 10 seconds later and do it. Like the more time you give them, oftentimes it's better. And some of these techniques, especially if you're operating on a lot of data, if you have a very long step of approaches, like it's going to take a while. Like maybe it's super fast measured in minutes, but like in some cases it could be even more. Whereas like ChatGPT made the chat interface standardized. I don't know if we have a standardized way by which we say, do this for a while, then come back to me. I don't think we all have in our mind a shared sense of exactly the best user interface for that. And I do believe, to your point, it's a little bit in the way of people adopting this and believing the value of it is that they don't know quite how to experience it. It makes sense to you if you get an email from somebody who works for you, says, here's the answer, they tap you on the shoulder, but how is the AI going to do that effectively? And in what kind of process does it have? And then how do you look at it and give it ongoing feedback in a way that is a great product experience? And I think as the agents evolve, we'll need to actually evolve that piece too. In a weird way, it might be even a bigger problem.
Yeah. And also like when I ask someone to do something, they rarely just do it. They usually do it and say, here are some questions I still have, which the overconfidence is a problem, these kinds of things. Yeah. I think there's a lot of really interesting UX to be built around like how we interact with these things. Yeah, they're designed to be one-shot tools right now versus iterations and interactions. I'm excited about it. And I think this is why tinkering is so important, because I think you start to come to these realizations in the attempt to try to get the existing tools to do what you want. There's a lot you learn and feel about it, where the magic thing, which is AI doing the job for me, doesn't really sum it up in the same way as actually doing it. For instance, I love the demo of, I don't know if you saw this, the kid working through his Pythagorean theorem homework. I was more impressed with that than asking it, what is the sine of angle alpha, which it usually might get wrong, but it was really good at working through it. And it sort of almost feels like, oh, are we asking these things the wrong problems to solve?
Yeah, that definitely illustrates some of the power of when you not only have the multimodal approach where it can see and hear at the same time, but also it responding quickly. That is so important for that kind of interaction. Like
also giving it the instruction, don't answer it, explain it.
Yeah.
It almost is like better at that. Yeah. All right, Ben, this has been awesome. Like super fun. I feel like I've learned a ton. Your experience at the intersections of product and technology and engineering have been really insightful here. If people want to hear more from you or excited about what you're working on, where should they find you and how should they connect?
So for me, the key thing that we want everybody to do is go to box.com. You can get an account to try out these kind of things. All the stuff we're talking about for unstructured data, the evolution of AI on top of content. This is what we do. And I would love for anybody who's interested to go get it, try it out, use it. Feel free to email me or contact me. And thanks for having me on here. I've enjoyed this.
Yeah, this has been super fun. And that's a wrap on this week's 2-part episode with Ben Kuss, the CTO of Box. Thanks, Ben, for coming. I learned a ton from this episode, and I hope everyone listening did as well. See you next week. Thanks so much.